We're now going to move on to have a question and answer session. So please, if you have questions either for Rupert or for Regina, or possibly for both of them, fire away. If you don't feel like talking, you can send them in the chat. But now is your chance to turn on your camera and your microphone and speak.
Maybe one question to Regine. So do you have a complete overview of how many different LIDO profiles already exist and are in practical use? And is it all, you know, on the LIDO website compiled, or is it like distributed information?
Yeah, I'm afraid it's distributed information, and as I mentioned, it's in many cases also rather implicit that LIDO profiles or that specific adaptations to the LIDO schemas are made in specific usage environments. So the answer is no. There is no complete overview, certainly, and we haven't collected that so far on the website. But as I will point out in the second part of my speech, we will address this now in the next, within the framework of our current developments.
Okay, thanks.
Well, while you're thinking about your possible questions, I know I have one for Rupert, possibly for Regina as well. Rupert, you mentioned at the outset in your presentation that the existing standards didn't really cover museum collections management issues very well. I was wondering, do you have any idea why that would be? You know, why is it that existing data standards don't cover collections management very effectively?
Well, that sounds perhaps a little unkind, certainly about Spectrum, which has is specifically set up to help manage collections. And the issue we had with Spectrum was, well, twofold. There was some of the sort of object tombstone data, the identification data that they didn't have, URIs in particular, which we really do want to encourage people to use where possible. And also, you tended to have really quite broad things, which were sort of, you know, that they were just a big chunk of text in areas where you might want to consider breaking your data down. So I think there's just one thing for environmental requirements, and it's just a big, you know, it's character data. Now, there are different kinds of environmental requirements, and those can be further broken down into individual units of information. They can be characterized as measurements if your collections management system goes that far. Whether collections management systems do or not is, I think it's variable from the experience I've had with them, but it's certainly possible. It's a different question with things like LIDO and its precursor formats, because they were never set up to be collections management systems. They were set up to basically help with the aggregation and presentation of kind of public-facing object data, and members of the public really don't want to know that your object requires, you know, 45 to 65% RH with a variation of no more than 5% in 24 hours. So it just wasn't required for those standards.
So would it,
yeah.
Sorry, Regina.
Yes, just to re-emphasizing this, I think, well, management information is typically not the kind of information that you want to exchange, and most standards are aiming at something like, exchanging information, publishing it, and especially sensible information is usually not meant to be published. So I guess it's simply a question of what is needed or what is required from many.
Gordon, I see, is worried that I've been maligning Spectrum.
Actually, no. We're not, as you well know, Rupert. We're not in that sort of game. I mean, basically, if there are any problems with Spectrum, which I think you've quite rightly identified, we just need to know about them so that we can change Spectrum. I mean, that's the way we work. We don't work. We're not gods on high who have the right idea. So just basically. And that applies to anything in Spectrum, so it's not just the things that you identified. We would like to know about it so that we can improve Spectrum in the future. That's all I would like to say.
Yeah, we were in a hurry. That's all I can say.
Rupert and Regine, thank you for your clarifications. I suppose, would it be fair to say, Rupert, as a summary of what your comments, that it's not so much, the problem isn't so much that the collections information wasn't there, but perhaps that it didn't have the level of granularity as data that was required for this project?
In Spectrum, yes. Yeah, that was the problem.
Any other questions?
Well, sorry, I have something that's just been directed to me in the chat, but I'm happy to answer it, which is why we didn't opt for linked art, and that was because, well, for two reasons. One, it's based on triples, and triples are hell as a data transport format. Most collections management systems don't translate easily into triples, and it's even harder getting them back in to what are usually relational databases. And the second is that we were looking for something that was well established, and whilst there's a lot of impetus behind linked data and I'm following it with interest, it's, you know, we're I think the last I saw was that they're just about at a version 1 release, whereas we know that LIDO has been around for some time, as Regina told us, and that, as I said in the talk, it has been built into the architecture of several fairly major collections management systems because of Europeana inside. It's there and it's ready to run in a way that linked art, I'm afraid, isn't.
We also had couple of questions here in the chat, but thank you for the community. Norbert and Regina has taken care of them.
Yes, thank you, Mary. Do look at the chat if you're interested in following up these questions, detailed questions. I do have another question actually arising from some of the comments you made, Regina, about LIDO. As Rupert was pointing out as well, the LIDO was intended originally, I mean, the primary purpose is sharing for consolidated databases and for outward-looking public information, including some of this information about collections management. And Rupert said things like humidity and so on. They're information that don't necessarily interest the public, but some of the information is actually likely to be confidential as well. Things like monetary value and so on. I was wondering, that sort of information wasn't originally contained in LIDO, and potentially its transfer raises some questions about security. And I was wondering if you've had, you know, what additional measures were necessary to, if you've had to take additional precautions in view of security, information security, using a mechanism like LIDO that wasn't originally intended for that sort of application.
Well, answering on two levels. First, your question about security issues. I guess the most likely security precaution to take is to not put it on an OAI server, which was originally the intended technique for the LIDO XML schema to be used together. Rupert showed us that the idea is of simply sending the information through email and have it in a standardized format. Yeah, asking back if you see there any further security issues. Of course, well, if email systems are not secure enough to exchange information, that's another level of question then. In terms of LIDO, it's an XML schema that you can use, yeah, through different protocols, and if you choose the email protocol, I think this issue is solved. And in terms of information that we need to represent in LIDO, well, you are one of the initiators of the CIDOC CRM, so you will likely, you will easily understand how we solve this in terms of representation in measurement. So actually many of these values can just be taken as measurements related to an event. And this is the way we represent or that much of this information can be represented in the existing schema already.
If I can just add to that, yeah, we're aware that well, the primary piece of confidential information that will be traveling is values, and we're aware that that's sensitive for some people, and we're therefore thinking about what we might want to do or need to do in terms of security. It may simply be that we zip our LIDO document up in a password protected zip file, for example. We're already thinking about zip archives for transferring images, so it would default to a password protected zip file. That may be one way. What we're trying not to do is have any requirement for somebody to set up a server that is needed for EODEM to work. We will need the profile validation to be set up somewhere, and Regine has offered to host that on the LIDO site. But what we don't want is to have any kind of infrastructure that has to be maintained by EODEM. However, somebody yesterday did point out that actually, you know, people are emailing loan agreements backwards and forwards, and those do have valuations in them, and nobody's worried about it yet. But I think we can do a bit better than that.
So would it be fair to say, Rupert, that whatever happens, things can hardly be worse than they are already?
Well, I would hate to say that. But I'm right.
Yes. Okay. So yes, I mean, yes, we're talking about security. I mean, sometimes I know people, especially IT specialists, can get very, very concerned about security problems. And when you look at the reality of the situation, we're sometimes extraordinarily lackadaisical and laxist about the sort of information we're prepared to exchange in very unsecure formats. So EODEM is going to be an improvement in any case on the sort of almost total absence of security that we sometimes have today. I think it's very interesting that you're suggesting that, you know, the architecture avoiding having a central server needs to be constructed in such a way that it avoids creating a target for hackers, for instance, creating a pool of information which would then attract attention from potentially nefarious individuals.
Yeah, it was also laziness on my part. I don't want to have to, you know, we don't want to have to start setting up servers, domains, and administering them.
Well, also, it is also a point-to-point connection, so there's no value in sharing that more widely.
Yeah.